Hi, welcome to Immediate Crisis. I'm Mackenzie. This is the first part of my Korean adoptee series. It has been a hot topic in Korean community because South Korea is the largest international adoptees exporter worldwide, mostly to the United States and Europe. According to a book published in 2010, Adopted Territory, Transnational Korean Adoptees and the Politics of Belonging by Eliana Jean Kim, Korean adoptees comprise about 10% of the total Korean American population. Especially a couple of cases of deportation of Korean adoptees from the United States have had a high profile in the US. It's new to me though, so I interviewed 3 women who were born in South Korea and adopted in the US in the 1970s and 1980s to learn their experiences. Before listening to their stories, to learn the troubled history of the US Korean adoptees, we first have to time travel back to the South Korea's military camp town, Kjichon, in the Korean War, where the US servicemen sexually exploited many South Korean women. As a result, at the end of the Korean War in 1953, the war-torn society, Isuman government, xenophobia, and patriarchy worked together to abandon lots of biracial kids. At that post-war time, those servicemen knocked up the Korean women and then vanished into thin air. And who took care of those kids became a problem. For government, those kids were heavy welfare burden. As for this patriarchal society, there was a profound bias against the babies without a Korean father's blood. For rising nationalities, these mixed-race kids were worth all the disgrace and racist insults. So single moms had to give them up and were tortured by lifelong guilt. And finding adoptive homes abroad naturally became a way out, providing the opportunity for the government and adoption services chains to make money from it. 7 years later, the war was gone, but sending babies abroad didn't stop it. By the end of 1980s, most adoptees were born to unwed mothers rather than biracial kids in the war. Widespread slut-shaming and the misogynic system usually forced the moms who had a child out of wedlock to abandon them. And the mid-1980s were the peak of the exodus. According to the article, Pity the Children, quote-unquote, by The Economist, back then 24 babies left the birth country each day to be taken into the care of foreigners. In order to let the whole adoption process work well, there were many loopholes and problems in this adoption system. For example, there was no strict newborn babies restriction policies. So biological parents of newborn babies tend to leave them unregistered. So adoption agencies were able to fabricate or obscure documents of these children to make them more available for adoption, like claiming them to be orphans, which caused an obstacle for abroad Korean adoptees to trace their origins. A survey done by the Overseas Korean Adoptions in 2006 estimated that only 2.7% of Korean adoptees reunited with their birth families. Lee Jun-gong, the lead of the first story MeeJin, is one of them. She talked about her reunion with her biological family in South Korea, her observation about their lives, her experiences growing up in a white family, her 10 years of volunteering for adopted kids, and her thoughts of identity and adoption. The following is our conversation. To start with birth search questions. Did you search for your biological parents?
I did. When I turned 18, I went to my adoption agency, Spencer Chapin, in New York City, and I asked if they had any like I forget that there's a special term like basic any identifying information I think for my records that my parents didn't already have, and they searched my records because I think there are some things that your adoptive parents can access, and then there's potentially more when you turn 18 that you can request. And they gave me like two pieces of paper. I feel like it was like an annual exam from when I was a baby. So nothing and they didn't have any more information on my birth parents, but they kind of put a search into their kind of their agency counterpart in Korea. So it was SWS. I think it goes by a new name now. And they put an inquiry in, they never heard anything back. So that was like, I was 18 the summer before I went to Boston University. And then the summer before my senior year, so I guess, 3 years later, 4 years later, I received a letter from my adoption agency that they had a letter from my birth mother and my biological older sister. So they had done a search on their end and they had found me. So they went back to, it's actually an incredible story that my birth mother had left me at like a church in Daegu, South Korea. And so she went back to that church like 20 years later, and somehow the woman remembered the baby, like remembered me, remembered the time. And so she knew, like, I guess they had paperwork. She knew the orphanage or the foster home that I went to. So they're basically able to backtrack where I went from stage to stage to ultimately find out that like I had been adopted to the US. So I first was in contact with them the summer of 2003, no, summer of 2002, sorry. And then we were in touch, phone, email. They only spoke Korean. I have a younger half sister who spoke a little bit of English, but she was like 9 at the time, 10 years old. And so then the year later, in the summer of 2003, I went back to Korea. I met my birth family, or that included my birth mother, my older sister, and a younger half brother and half sister, because my birth mother had gotten remarried and had 2 additional kids with her new husband. So I spent about 2.5 weeks in Korea. I went with my parents. We spent time in Seoul, and then we spent time in Daegu, which is where my birth family lives, and which is where I was born.
Can you take me through that day, your first reunion and the reunion you mentioned before?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts, your feelings, and any your observations?
Yeah, I was really anxious, like excited, but not sure what to expect. And so we were just sitting in like a waiting room in Seoul in SWS office, and I think they all came in, and my birth mother just came to me first, and she like gave me a big hug, and she was crying. I honestly can't remember. I was crying. Yeah, I definitely was, because now I remember. I remember seeing pictures. My eyes were all red, and so there was crying, and just I think it's odd because you can't like directly communicate, but just a lot of like looking at everybody and hugs. And I remember feeling happy but a little overwhelmed. We sat down, and like there was a translator there, so they helped us translate some like conversations. Then we went to lunch in Seoul and had a translator there. I don't remember my exact feeling at that moment, like when I first met her, but in the 2.5 weeks that I was there, it was tough. Like it was a lot of highs and lows. My parents came with me for like the first, I want to say 10 to 11 days. And then I was staying like another 5 to 7 days alone. And I didn't want my parents to leave. Like I really wanted to go home because it was like overwhelming, and for your only 2 English speakers to leave. And now like I was going to actually stay with my birth family in their home. Before that I had been in a hotel with my parents, so there was at least that like separation and like your space. But my dad encouraged me to stay, and he was like, if you really need to come home, we'll bring you home, but like you can survive anything for a week. Nothing's going to be that bad, and like this isn't going to be that bad that you can't survive for. So I toughed it out and I stayed, and I'm glad I did, but it was overwhelming. Like I did not connect with my birth mother. To this day, I still don't really. I find her a lot, for lack of better words. I just find her very emotional, like and it's hard because she's emotional, like it's physical. Like she just always wanted to be touching me and hugging me and embracing me. And I think she just expected this instant connection with me that I didn't reciprocate. I felt a stronger connection to my siblings, and I definitely felt a lot of sadness towards my older sister because we shared both of our parents were the same. Oh, and the reason that I was adopted was because my older sister was only 16 months older than me, and our birth father had died of like a heart attack essentially when he was 29 years old. To this day, because I've never gotten clear clarity, know if I was born when he died or if he died while my birth mother was pregnant. That detail I'm not sure of. But essentially, my birth mother had two young babies, and she didn't have the support, I guess, to be able to keep both of us.
Yeah, because I know you should born around the 1980. I know at this time, many Korean adoptees babies, they were adopted because single mom has no support.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, she had two little babies. And it through the translations and the translator, I learned that my sister knew of me throughout her life. Like she probably didn't have memories because she was 16 months when I was born and I was placed at like 4 months. So she knew of me though, and she was always sad, but she could never talk about me or ask questions because it was considered disrespectful to our birth mother's new family, like new husband. So that's really, she just seemed really sad, my older sister. She was also treated differently, like almost like hired help. The two younger siblings who, you know, are the children of my birth mother's new husband, who seemed perfectly nice and he was welcoming of me. But she seemed like my older sister seemed like the caretaker, hired help of the two younger ones. She wasn't treated like family. And that made me sad because my older sister just looked visibly sad and like looked like she had so much to say to me. And she really didn't because of translations. But even with a translator, she was very timid. I think one time she actually chose to speak through the translator, and that's when she said that she was always sad. She always thought about me, but she didn't. She didn't feel. She was told that she couldn't, so that's really hard. I think with my birth mother, it's like the big difference is she told me she thought about me every single day since you know she placed me at this church when I was 4 months old, and I did not think about her every single day. So I think that's just like as a mom now, I get it. Like I have more empathy for my birth mother after I became a mom myself, like because it's an impossible decision that she made. So I get her need to like hug me and touch me and do all that and why she would have thought about me every single day. But at the time as a 21-year-old when I met her, I did not think about her every single day. I would think about her sparingly. And some adoptees do. Like I was a mentor for 10 years with teenage or tween from like 12 to 18-year-old adoptees. And so I heard a lot of stories from other mentees, from other adult adoptees. And some people do really think about their birth parents, like if not daily, frequently. I really didn't.
Yeah, you're too
Not even on my
small.
birthday, you know, like a lot. That's a really common day to think about it is on your birthday. It's also common like on the day you're adopted, which my family didn't even celebrate. And so like I didn't have that same feeling of like reunion and embracement when I met my birth mother. So I struggled there with the relationship with her, but like it definitely felt like a stronger connection to the kids. So that was in 2003 that I went there. And then, you know, for 15-ish years, we were on and off in contact. We would sometimes email, but it would take weeks for like an email to be translated. Then there was a lot of time, probably like, I don't know, there probably was a good 8, 9 years of like zero contact. I was like, I was like searching for an email. And like really what prompted me to get back in touch was when my first son was born in 2019. And I was struggling, could be the right word, of like how was I really wanted to raise my son because my husband is white. He's, you know, half Italian, you know, born in America, so Italian American, German American, just very basic white, for lack of better words. and my kids were going to be biracial, and I wanted them to have some kind of Korean sense and identity. So I felt like I just wanted to get back in touch with my birth family to just learn about like how do they celebrate holidays, like so I think probably in 2019 I got back in touch. Found my younger sister, so she's the only one in the family who speaks English, and she speaks it pretty well at this point. And I learned that she had gotten married. I learned she had two kids. My older sister had two kids. I have a younger brother. He doesn't have any kids yet. So we've been since 2019, like on and off. We message on Facebook Messenger. We tried to do like a video call one time. We really haven't attempted that much. I mean, I think mostly it's just like the time difference is hard, and like we just all have kids and we're all busy and it's crazy times.
Yeah.
But I try to share like photos. Like we did the traditional like 100-day celebration for my first son, and they sent for Alex, who's my first son, they sent a hanbok for him for his first birthday. So we, did that, and I'll have all pictures of, and we did the traditional thing at the 1-year-old where like they choose the different objects, and that's kind of supposed to be their destiny for the future, if they're going to be like a lawyer or a doctor, whatever it is. So we did that with both our boys, actually, had them both in their hanboks. And we've been trying to like incorporate some Korean, traditions around like Lunar New Year and Seoul around the fall with Chuseok. So we try to do like little things. I have a decent amount of Korean books the picture books for the kids. So I try to figure out a way to honor it as much as I can. That feels appropriate.
I want to go back to your first visits to the Seoul. And do you remember what you talked about with your mom?
I mean, over the course of time, she wanted to hear about, like, she was always like, "Are you healthy?" That was always like her big thing. Like, are you happy? Are you healthy? She wanted to know about like what it was like growing up, and like what I was, doing after college. It was sort of like big conversations like that. It was not necessarily like, what type of food do you like to eat? Like it was almost like, tell me that you're happy and healthy. But like I guess that's why I probably struggled in hindsight, and maybe I didn't have the self-awareness in the looking back, is that I like to have like deeper conversations with people, and we just weren't there because of like, I think the circumstances, but also just like having to have a constant translator. So I wasn't able to say like, how did you feel? Like, why did this happen? And like, why didn't anyone support you? Because the other thing that was like, felt strange to me was like, I was placed for adoption because I was told there was no support. But at one point during my visit, in Korean that they call everyone like basically like auntie, like they use sort of generic terms for people's relationship to you. So we had like, they basically had a party. And my understanding was like, I met my birth mother's sisters. Like she probably had like at least two or three sisters. So I don't know if they were her sisters or sister-in-laws, but there were so many people. And I was sort of like, okay, here they all like coming to like meet me and celebrate me, but like, how come nobody could help her, 20 years ago? And everyone seemed, they didn't seem to live in like poverty. I didn't get to ask those questions, and I wouldn't have obviously asked it so bluntly like that. But I did wonder, I was like, they seem all supportive, like, and everything's different during that time. But like, it's sort of like, oh, they could come out to celebrate me, but where it was like the family support when, yeah, my birth mother had to make an impossible decision. So I had a little bit of resentment because of that. But I didn't get to ask all the questions about my birth father that I would have liked to ask. I also was awkward because I don't think they were telling my younger sister and brother that our father wasn't the same. So when we went to the grave, I wasn't sure. I thought we were at my birth father's grave, but I asked my younger sister, and she was like, I don't know. And she said something like relative, like basically like a relative. So they had not been honest with her. And honestly, to this day, I don't know if she knows. I assume she's smart enough to realize like we don't have the same father, but I don't know. I don't know that for 100%. She definitely didn't as a kid. And so I didn't get to ask those more in-depth conversations to really understand. Like, I don't even know how they met. Like, I don't know. They did show me wedding pictures, so I got to see that. But like, there weren't like in-depth conversations. They felt very like just high level.
Sure. I think your resentment is very important because it is a systematic question in Korea, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember like when you saw your mom for the first time, your nose, mouth, eyes, do you feel like yours looks like hers?
I think I resemble her more so than I think I actually resemble my older sister, which, you know, you think two kids so close in age, same gender would share more resemblance. But I do. And I actually saw more resemblance with my younger sister. But I do. And it's funny, like I think I'm the age now that my birth mother was when I met her. Like I think she was like 41, 42 when I met her, and I'm about to be 43 in a few months. So I'm like, oh, that's so crazy. She looks so much older than me, I think, than what I look like now. But maybe that's just my bias. But yeah, I definitely, and I had seen photos too, you know, before I actually met her in person. And they showed me other family photos while I was there. And I saw a picture of my sister when she was younger, and it looked almost like exactly like. So it's sort of like, oh, okay, like I see it like as we were like younger, because I've had people ask me since, like, did you do DNA testing to actually confirm they're your family? And I was like, no, is that a thing? People do that? Like, and I get it, right? Like, people could say anything. In theory, like, they knew me because they told me what my name was and whatever and everything. But I guess in theory, maybe they're not my family, my birth family. So I still to this day, I have not done that. But I've seen enough resemblance, and it's not, as though like they're asking me for my liver or something. So, but yeah, I saw resemblance to that photo. But yeah, I think the biggest difference is like I'm 5'3". I think my older sister was like 5'7". So she was like so much taller than me. She was like way skinnier than I was. Parts of like my birth mother's personality, just little things I saw in myself, like a little bit stubborn, but like when we carry bags in from like the grocery store, like she wants to do it herself. She didn't want help, and she would like carry like a million bags by herself. And that is so me. Like, I don't want people to help me. Like, I can do it. Like, even though we're both like, I think she was about my height. So even though we're like small people, like we just want to do it ourselves.
Yeah, it's very independent personality.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you requested records from the agencies in New York City. And when you saw this document, did you find that your personal information, like name, birthdays, medical history, are they consistent with the information you got when you grow up?
Yeah, they were, because it wasn't very much, to be honest. So it was consistent. I remember a high school friend asking me like what information do you know? And I'm like, not much. I know like my birth name was MeeJin Park, born 8/7/81, and I was born in Seoul. Like that was like all the identifying information basically I'd had since birth. And he was like, how do you know any of that is true? And I was like, oh, that's a really good point. I guess I don't. I guess I really don't know if any of that is true. So, yes, I think part of like when I reunited, I was happy to hear that I was in fact born on August 7th. So I was really happy that that was my birthday, because that does happen. You do hear that like kids get to like an orphanage and they estimate their date, they give them a name, and like that's your information. The only thing was incorrect was I was born in Daegu. I was not born in Seoul. So I had thought for 21 years that I was born in Seoul, and I wasn't. So that was the only piece of information, which I could have lived with that. One thing my birth mother like was so appreciative of, they that for a year they were calling me MeeJin, and I assumed they knew that was my name. It wasn't just the name that I was letting them call me. And so then when we get to Korea, so like a year after we've been in contact, they're asking what my name is, and we keep saying MeeJin. Like me and my parents are kind of thinking like, why do they keep asking? And the translator finally is able to say, like, no, they know her name is MeeJin, but what's her American name? And we're like, oh, they assume that my name was changed. And they're like, no, 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 like they kept her name. Her name is MeeJin. And their like look was like shocked, and they were so grateful. Like my birth mother, like literally got down on her knees and was like bowing, like doing like the deep, Korean bows to my parents, because she was like so deeply appreciative, because like names are so important in Korea. And Me was, I guess, considered kind of like our family name, because my older sister's name was MeeJung and my younger sister's name was MeeYoung. So the fact that my name stayed intact and I still had that like connection to my, my birth name, which was so important to them, and they were so so grateful. And I have to say, like, I am too. Like, I didn't like it growing up all the time, mainly because like so many adults would butcher it or not say it correctly. And I was a pretty like timid kid that I wouldn't like speak up and correct people. I do now as an adult, but then I didn't. So I didn't like it all the time for that reason. But now I'm like, I'm really appreciative that my parents kept my birth name, because it's literally the only thing I've had since birth, because I gotten married and divorced and remarried, and I changed my last name during all of that. So I've like changed my last name like too many times to count at this point. Um, and so I have a lot of like affinity towards my first name, because it's like the one thing that's remained consistent. Then when I
Yeah.
went to Korea, I met this woman. She was like kind of helping with the translation, and we're like, "What's your name?" And obviously she had a Korean name, but she was like, "Just call me Rachel. It's easier." And we're like, easier for who? Like,
Yeah.
so we called her Rachel because I was going to respect what she said, but I thought that was so, I don't know, odd. Not odd, but like disappointing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think we can talk about your growing up experiences in the US. Could you share some like your thoughts or experiences about your adjustment in your adoptive parents' home?
Yeah. So I came to the US when I was 10 months. So it's the only real home that I know. My parents are white. My dad grew up in the US. My mom's actually British. So she was born in London and came here when she was 18. I have an older sister who's 3.5 years older, and she is biological to my parents. She couldn't be more different personality, but also just looks wise. She's, tall with blonde hair and blue eyes. So I always knew I was adopted. I don't remember like this revealing conversation, because it was just always known. I grew up in northern New Jersey in a predominantly white neighborhood, middle class, middle to upper class. And I had what I think is a pretty normal upbringing, for better or worse. Adoption was not a big part of my story growing up. I did not identify with being an adoptee. I don't even know how much I identified with being Asian. I didn't dislike it, but we did not, quote unquote, celebrate it in my family. And I think that's probably a slight disservice. My mom will say, because I've had these conversations with her since, there's just more resources available now. There's more programs, there's more things you can find online, and et cetera, et cetera. All that is true. She says like they took me to a Korean culture camp when I was like 5, but I didn't like it. And I do have memories of it being really, really overwhelming and just too many people. And then so she was just like, so we stopped doing it. And it's sort of like, okay, you did it once and you could have revisited, or there was other ways to do it. And so I think she's learned, and she's like realized, but like, my parents were busy. They worked multiple jobs sometimes. So like, I get it, especially now being a parent, it's hard. But I will say like, that's probably why I prioritize it a little bit more, to expose my kids to that. But yeah, I grew up like a normal childhood. Like, I was really into sports and basketball and softball. I had a lot of friends. I did well at school. I studied, did all my tests, and knew that I was going to go to a college, that type of thing. Like, it was pretty typical, I guess you could say.
You texted to me that you have some experiences that when you got older and looked back and you find it a little painful. Could you share some experiences like that?
Oh, I think what I meant there was like, I think I personally did not experience like pain and trauma during my adoption. But as I've gotten older, and learned more about the adoption process, particularly in Korea. There was a big New York Times article probably about a little less than a year ago, really exposing kind of it being like an industry, a service that I don't have as positive opinions about adoption. Or I shouldn't say positive, that it's not always like a happy story. I guess put it that way. And I feel grateful that I did have a happy story, but when I think about yeah, like my Korean identity was stripped from me. I have very well meaning parents who were very progressive and open minded and exposed me to a lot of different cultures. But they didn't do a great job of exposing me to a Korean culture. So, yeah, I did lose that. And I don't even think I realized I lost that until like honestly becoming a mom and just realizing like the impact of raising biracial kids. And the more, yeah, like adoption does not always mean a good thing. I think a lot of people come from it from a good place, but you kind of have to think about like the reasons some people are being placed for adoption. And could there have been more efforts to keep families together? And could that be where resources go or to help families like stay together versus like resources to try to find new homes for kids, especially when they are then going like when it's a international adoptee. So now you're like removing kids from their origin, from their like birth country. I think it's sad. When I was in Korea and I'm looking at my older sister who's 16 months older, I'm like looking at her life and I was like, would I rather this be my life? Or am I happy where I was? And I was happy where I was. I was like, she seems so sad. She lives like with her whole family still. She has no independence. She's treated like a second class citizen. I was like, I don't want this life. And I remember thinking, does she look at me and say, I want her life? Or does she look at me like sad because she thinks she has a better life? Like, I don't know. And those are conversations I didn't get to have with her. And like, I don't know that I ever will have them with her. So there's a lot of loss with adoption. I think people think about the gains that you get because a lot of people assume like, oh, we're giving this child a better life. We're giving these loving parents who want to have a child a family. So they think about the gains, but adoption really starts with the loss. And I think that wasn't obvious to me when I was younger. Like that was like as an adult and hearing more stories that were not like happy endings like mine and normal childhood like mine, like hearing people who really had a lot of pain and suffering growing up, who never felt like they belonged, whose parents maybe treated them poorly. And that was the stories I heard, like from people like firsthand, like in my like mentorship groups, the things you read about, of like the other end of the extreme of like actual abuse, like physical, mental, sexual abuse. Like that's just like, I never experienced any of that and I've never heard firsthand, but it doesn't mean it wasn't happening and it was. So it's like, I was definitely sheltered and had only had like a pretty narrow view of adoption when I was a kid, which I think is normal. You kind of live in your own little bubble. This was pre social media, so I wasn't able to hear other people's stories so readily. And I think that is actually part of the power of social media, is that you really can give people a voice and a platform and you can learn about all sorts of things.
I'm glad to hear that. You said you participate mentorship program related to adoptees.
Yep. So I went back when I came back as a young adult. I went back to Spence Chapin, which was the agency that I was adopted through, to see like what volunteer opportunities they had. Like I kind of like wanted to learn more about the adoptee community and to be involved. They had a program where they were looking for adult mentors who were adopted to mentor teenagers, so they could range from sixth grade to 12th grade. And I did that for 10 years.
Awesome.
And it was as a peer mentorship group. So we didn't do like one-on-one matches. It was basically like group activities. And then that month you might have somebody that you're paired up with. And we would meet September, like the school year, September through June, we would meet once a month. And sometimes they were just purely fun events like bowling or cooking class, where you just get to know people. And then sometimes they were like purely like adoption driven. So we might have like an identity day where like you're spending time like drawing or creating something that represents you and then sharing it. And it was always like, tell us, share as much as you want or share as little as you want. But it was really meant to provide access just to other people who had a similar story to you, or maybe didn't have a similar story, but that at the end of the day, we all were adoptees that were in the room, and anything we shared, stayed in that space. And it was just like some of the kids, it was like they'd never met another adoptee, and like I would have loved that growing up, just to know like, oh, there are people like me. And even if I'm thinking like I probably would have been too timid to want to share, but like it was really amazing. I knew several of the kids from when they were sixth grade all the way to 12th grade. And just to see their development and their voice like come to life in those years, like to being like the little kids who never said anything to saying so much at their last event of like all the things that they took away or they like observed, and you're just like blown away by how meaningful it actually was when you're just like, oh, are these kids getting anything from this? And like their facilitators would always tell us, these are teenagers. If they weren't getting anything from it, they wouldn't be back every month. Like they might act aloof sometimes and that they're not there, that they don't want to be here, but like they wouldn't come if they truly didn't see the value. So it was great. And the only reason I stopped was because I was pregnant, and I've had 2 kids now in the past 5 years. So they just basically have taken up my free time and my energy. So,
Oh, that's very impressive.
yeah.
You did for 10 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because you were growing up in a white family, do you have some experience that impresses you related to like some awkward things related to race?
I feel like within my own family, no. I would say sometimes I felt awkward when like we didn't have any first cousins. Like my dad was an only child, so I didn't have any first cousins on his side. On my mom's side, we did have first cousins, but they were literally like 15 plus years older than us because my mom was a younger sibling and they lived in London. So we didn't have all this extended family in the US that we're close to. So for most things, it was just our family of 4. I felt uncomfortable sometimes when we would see my dad's extended family. So like his cousins and their kids, because like, I don't know, I would just look around and then all of a sudden it was even more obvious that like I didn't look like everybody. It's different when it's like 3 other people in your family and you don't even think about it on a day-to-day basis, but then you go to some like big thing and it's all family and everyone just does not look like you. And no one ever treated me differently, but I did feel different. And I don't think that's something I've, even talked to my family about now, because there was nothing, I don't know. It's like, what is there to say? Because I didn't have a reason for feeling that. Not that I didn't have a reason. Nobody ever treated me differently. It was just a feeling that I had. But overall, like I can think of like a handful of racist things that happened to me, mostly like people pulling their eyes back and like making fun of like my eyes. But like it's literally like a handful of when I was a kid. But I will say, like, I hear other adoptee or other Asians who live in the same area of New Jersey as I did, and they had a very different experience. So it's not to say like racism didn't exist when I was a kid. It didn't happen directly to my face. Maybe it was happening and I was like protected from it.
Yes.
But I didn't have a lot of blatant racism in my face.
That's great. That's great. And I think it's my last question. I saw one of your tweets in 2015. It says, "Today, my niece and I had our first convo about my adoption." I am curious because I use the advanced search in your Twitter, and this is the only tweet related to adoption. I used it as a keyword, I think. So I think you tweeted that because maybe something impressed you in that conversation. Could you share about that?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. It's so funny. I'm like, I can't believe my Twitter is still out there alive somewhere because I have not even like downloaded X or whatever it is now. I don't even think I can access it. I probably have to reset everything. So yeah, I'm very close with my niece, and I was always like really, and I'm like that with my kids now. Like I was always curious when they would question or want to know like why I don't look like everybody else. You know, like kids are just they just take things as fact. You're my aunt, you're my mom. I'm not going to question why Nanny doesn't look like my mom doesn't look like me. So I remember one of the earlier conversations with my niece being about adoption, and this probably was a conversation of like, I said to her, do you know what it means to be adopted? And I think she said no, or maybe she said kind of, because if it was 2015, she would have been 7. And I remember the way I explained it was that I was a baby and I needed a home because the parents that I was born to couldn't take care of me anymore. And they tried to find me a family that had so much love to give that they wanted to give it to a child that they didn't give birth to. And I said, do you know who those parents were? And she looked at me and she was like, Nanny and Granddad, which is what she called my parents. And I said, yeah. And she smiled. And I was like, so that's how I was adopted and became part of this family. So I remember like that was the way we described that. I don't remember, I just remember her kind of being like happy about it. I don't think we really talked about it much after that, or honestly, even since then. With my own kids, I had the similar with Alex. He's younger, but I've started talking to him about it probably since he was like 3.5, 4, about like that I was never in Nanny's belly, like he was in mine, and like tried to kind of explain it in the same way. And now I talk about like having a Korean mom and having Nanny. I don't know if he totally gets that. We have a couple of books that mention adoption. So like I do want him to be familiar with the idea of adoption, but I probably have focused more on my efforts on like the Korean culture than I honestly have about like the adoption, being adopted.
And I think that's all the questions I have for today. I want to ask, is there anything else that you want to add or emphasize before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, it's the adoption process. It really, like, it is sad. My husband and I are done having children biologically, but we have toyed with the idea of like, could we or would we adopt in the future? I have mixed feelings about it because of the things I've learned about it, of just the process and like it just sometimes feeling like it's for profit. More so than, coming from a place of humanitarian and caring for
Mm,
kids. But, I guess I still haven't completely, say like, I would never say never. I was also open to, I will say the one thing is like being an adoptee, I would have been open to adopting in order to have children. Like having children was really important to me. And I wanted to have biological children. And I think that was because of being an adoptee, just that like need to have biological people as part of your immediate family. And so very grateful that I was able to even like later in life being able to have 2 biological kids, and it was very meaningful when they turned 4 months because that was when I was placed for adoption. I remember it being like just crazy to think about. Like that's what I had a lot of empathy for my birth mother, was like holding my 4-month old and just being like, I can't imagine being with this baby every single moment for the last 4 months and then just being able to go and leave them at a church and walk away. So I don't think she was an evil, cruel person. So I can only imagine like that was an awful, terrible decision she had to make for the sake of her family. But it's a decision I just hope like people will never have to be in. So if they had
yeah.
the resources available to them, both through like the state, the country, the local government, whatever it is, let alone your personal family and your personal, village. But it's really sad to think about. And I don't think that really resonated with me until I was like holding my own 4-month-old, to just be like, it's just awful.
Yeah, congratulations, you have 2 babies.
Yeah, they're great.
And I think if you adopted another child, you will be the most empathetic person in the world with that
Yeah.
child. Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing your stories with me today. I really appreciate your openness and willingness to share many stories with me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
Being adopted was something that MeeJin couldn't get to control. It just happened to her. So I feel heartbroken to hear her walk through all of those things that she had to deal with. It's sad thinking about a family that gave up on raising a baby, but suddenly tried to find her 20 years later. And it was super interesting to me that MeeJin kept this Korean name, which includes a common naming pattern in East Asia. Most East Asian people have a three-character name. The first one is the surname, and parents usually name all siblings with the same middle character, combined with the third character to get a first name. The signal also allowed MeeJin and her birth family to confirm each other. MeeJin's story also left me some meaningful questions. For her older sister, how saying the younger sister was adopted affected her, how her life was like, and for people who choose to adopt a child, to what extent you should incorporate the ethnic identity into the child's growth. Alright, I think I can leave it there. Thanks for listening. See you next episode.